More details are continuing to emerge in the aftermath of the most powerful earthquakes in Venezuela since 1900. The main shock registering 7.5 on the Richter scale. It happened on late Wednesday night. Parts of the capital, Caracas, badly hit. The worst region appears to be the northern coast of La Guaira. Hundreds have died, thousands missing. The reports from rescue operations ongoing is of locals and federal workers searching the rubble of collapsed buildings by hand. The lights of mobile phones being used in absence of proper equipment. One resident in Caracas, Luis Gonzalez, telling reporters a short while ago he saw buildings coming down behind him in seconds.
The building collapsed as soon as the first tremor struck. In other words, it swayed, collapsed, crashed into the one next to it, the neighboring building, and came crashing down in a matter of fractions of a second. It's presumed that the few people who were living there and happened to be present at the time are presumed dead. We never lose hope that, by the grace of God, the hand of God, there might be a victim lying there unconscious but still alive.
Now, amidst the tragedy, there is some shimmer of hope, a rescue operation just in the past few hours. This is in Caracas. Graciela Mora, who was pulled from under the rubble of a collapsed building. She's rescued with injuries. She's survived. She's got a broken hand. Her friends say she was at the time thought to have died. Images coming through AP right now, Associated Press. There's also a focus on diplomatic support that now follows in a country already in a state of flux since January, since the US capture of Nicolas Maduro. President Trump said back then he could work with the replacement, President Germania Rodriguez, and said the US was essentially in charge anyway. So what does that all mean on the ground? US rescue teams are amongst those on the way.
We're sending specialized personnel to carry out search and rescue operations. They go with their equipment. Additionally, we are loading approximately 12 tons of specialized equipment to carry out search, rescue and recovery actions. We hope to find people alive, trapped under the rubble. That's our highest expectation. We've brought a lot of equipment to carry out technological searches, which is best suited to this scenario, searching under the rubble or under piles of debris.
Let's speak to Germania Rodriguez Paleo, the American Venezuelan journalist and commentator, former US chief reporter for the Daily Mail, and now runs her own news platforms on social media. I am Germania. Great to have you back with us tonight, Germania. First of all, what's your reading of the situation at the moment, the scale of this operation, the scale of the challenge?
Thank you for shining a light on this horrific tragedy, Gavin. The situation on the ground is absolutely dire. It's been over 24 hours since the two earthquakes hit the northeastern coast of Venezuela. Those 72 first hours after a tragedy like this are so important when it comes to saving lives. But as you mentioned, Venezuela was already collapsed before Wednesday after 30 years of a corrupt socialist dictatorship. That means that there are no rescue teams that are equipped to help people. It's been left to the citizens of Caracas and La Guaira to use their hands, their cell phone lights. Some of them are using motorcycle helmets to try to get people from under the rubble. Of course, the dictatorship is not to blame for an earthquake, but they are to blame for the fact that the country is not prepared at all to handle this. This is the hour today, over 24 hours after the earthquakes, and there have been no professional rescue missions. Yes, we have, thank God, international help coming. Some of them are arriving. However, because the airport, the main airport that services Caracas, which is in La Guaira, has been destroyed, these rescue teams are flying in from a nearby state, from Aragua, and they are yet to get to the area that needs the most help, which is La Guaira. So countless lives have been lost that in a normal country would have been rescued. The images are absolutely devastating. We are seeing citizens using ropes to try to lift cement blocks that are where people are trapped under. Not only that, but the the structures built by the Hugo Chavez regime, these houses and buildings, they were not built under regulations to survive earthquakes, even though that Venezuela is known to be susceptible to earthquakes. And these structures were the first to completely collapse. Some of them caught on fire. And of course, there are tens of thousands of people who have disappeared. The official number, a bit over 500, doesn't even begin to cover the reality of the tragedy that Venezuela is experiencing right now. And I use this opportunity to tell the world we need international help more than ever. We were already a destroyed country. We cannot handle this. In the next 2 days, it'll be fundamental for actual rescue teams with equipment, with helmets, with flashlights to come try to save the lives of the people who are still alive, trapped under the rubble, particularly in La Guaira.
Amani, we're seeing, and I want to talk about La Guaira in a moment. So we were seeing live images of the rescue operation, or some extent to a rescue, with construction workers, trucks trying to get through, dig in within the rubble of this building. There's 2 ongoing operations. We've got live images from Associated Press, is both in Caracas right now. You mentioned this, and you're not the only person, that we're not seeing a significant organised federal rescue operation. We heard from the interim acting president, Germania Rodriguez, today, talking about millions being allocated, talking about a rescue operation that's going to start. But if we're not seeing that, I want to quote as well Vanessa Newman, an opposition figure in Madrid, the former London envoy to the former opposition leader, Juan Guaido. She said similar things to what you've just said, that we're not seeing lights, official lights. These are mobile phone lights, a lack of diggers, lack of mechanical equipment. You explain there isn't that. And am I right to say you grew up in Venezuela at a time where you were given these drills? What happens if there's an earthquake? So why aren't we seeing it?
Exactly. Venezuela is on a fault line. In 1967, Caracas experienced an earthquake that we grew up hearing about as a historic destruction. That earthquake was 6.8 magnitude. These were 2 earthquakes, 7.1 and 7.6. After the earthquake in the 60s, the democratic governments built structures to survive these earthquakes. In fact, those are the few structures that have remained standing in Caracas. As you mentioned, in school, we Venezuelans grew up doing earthquake drills every few months because we knew we had to prepare for something like this that was coming. Civil engineers have been talking about this. Geological experts have been talking about the fact that Venezuela was due for an earthquake like this. There is no reason why Venezuela should be this unprepared for it. But of course, the reason is that we have been under a criminal dictatorship for 30 years. And another important point of this, Gavin, is that in these crises, in a normal country, as you would know, it is the military and the National Guard who usually step in to rescue people. We have not seen, look at the images, you barely see any uniformed people. Where is the National Guard? The National Guard that over the last 30 years has been quick to go out to repress protesters. They have killed protesters. For that, they have been trained. Today, they are nowhere to be found. There are no federal operations, and the military is nowhere to be seen in Caracas or in La Guaira.
Yeah, it's a compare and contrast, isn't it? I've heard a number of people in Caracas, eyewitnesses, talking to reporters, saying a similar thing you're reflecting, which is they were there on the streets, ubiquitous after the fall of Maduro, after the capture, imposing themselves. They're not. I was just seeing these live images being seen to impose themselves now. What are the conversations? Are you managing to have conversations with contacts in Caracas, in La Guaira, in areas in Venezuela to get a sense of individual stories?
Of course, I thank God my family that remains in Venezuela is okay, but we had an apartment in a building in La Guaira that completely collapsed. We have not been able to contact any of the neighbors in that zone. There are absolutely no rescue efforts. People are just standing outside these buildings, crying in devastation. Elderly people are wandering the streets because their families have left the country. They're sleeping in plazas because the federal government has not even provided any anywhere for these people to take shelter. This is another factor of this. There's going to be tens of thousands of homeless people who were already living in extreme poverty, who all they had was a house. Now they are sleeping in plazas because they have not even been provided any type of shelter. The individual stories are horrific. Every Venezuelan is going to be affected by this. We know someone who has disappeared, or we know loved ones who cannot find their families. I mean, my phone is filled with people that I know desperately searching for their relatives. Another factor of this was that the dictatorship had news outlets and social media platforms like Twitter, X, blocked until I think it was yesterday that they unblocked it. So at first, people couldn't even use social media to try to alert the world or try to find their loved ones. The individual stories are horrifying, but I also want to highlight that Venezuelan civilians have been the ones to come out and try to help people. Like I said, I've been seeing videos of Venezuelans using their motorcycle helmets to try to pull people out of the rubble. This has really demonstrated how even after 30 years of corruption and destruction, the average Venezuelan citizen is still a decent person who wants a normal country, and they are willing to risk their own lives to try to save their fellow Venezuelans when the federal government is nowhere to be found.
To that point, and to the point about the switching off, I'm assuming the switching off certain social media and an ability to almost kind of miniature Iran style. This is an aftermath of the capture back in January. This is something that hasn't been properly reinstated.
Correct. Twitter had been blocked for about 2 years when Maduro went full totalitarian after he lost the 2024 election and stole it. They had blocked Twitter. And even after Maduro's arrest, the site remained blocked. Venezuelans needed a VPN to use it. And that's just a reminder that, yes, there was an opportunity for Venezuela to improve and for us to open a path to democracy with Maduro's arrest. But this shows how the same Chavista dictatorship remains in power, and they are acting as they always have. You know, Gavin, the first year of Chavez's government in '99 was the last time that La Guaira experienced a natural tragedy like this, and they did the exact same thing. At that time, they refused to let the media cover it. They refused international help, and 20,000 people died in La Guaira. Well, at least now, 30 years later, thank God the United States and other countries are in a situation where they can help. Thank God that this happened after January 3rd and not before.
And there's one thing also to note, because I've covered earthquakes before, including in Chile, where they pick up seismic activity. There was no, it appears, going back to what we were saying earlier, we're not hearing any evidence so far of a notice beforehand, no warning system, official warning system. There are stories coming from some Android smartphones that some social media users on Android or Apple iOS, they both have an option to display government alerts. There's what's it called, the accelerometer, which is a movement sensor used for basically flipping the screen. You can also detect or give some signs of alerts. But from what we're hearing, I'm guessing it's the same with you, Germania, this is not something like an organised amount of time for people to flee. And this was ongoing, I'm right in saying Wednesday night, there's a lot of images coming from the bars. People were watching the World Cup, they were watching Scotland, Brazil, and had very little notice to run.
There was absolutely no notice from the federal government, even though, like I said, experts had been warning that something like this was coming. I understand that Google did send an alert to some people that there was some type of earthquake activity that could happen, and a lot of people were able, I think this was 10 seconds or something like that before the earthquake hit. But no, not only that, it's not only that the federal government did nothing before, but Delcy Rodriguez took 5 hours to speak to the nation after this happened. And it's over 24 hours, and Delcy Rodriguez is still, she has come out to issue some numbers that are definitely below what the reality is. But aside from that, the government has simply completely abandoned citizens at this critical hour.
This is a test, isn't it, for the American government? And you talk about La Guaira on the northern coast. People back in January will know the helicopters were flying over the coast to Caracas to capture Maduro. Now we have this similar path, this eerie sense of these people now seeing the worst of a natural disaster, and President Trump, as I mentioned at the top, effectively spoke earlier a few months ago of being in charge of the country and letting Delcy Rodriguez do what she wanted in some areas. Does that make Venezuela right now a US protectorate with responsibility?
Well, we're about to see whether that's true, because Donald Trump has been saying a lot of things. He's been saying people are dancing on the streets, that people are receiving more money than they ever have. That's not true, because the Venezuelan economy is worse than ever right now. The infrastructure is completely collapsed. All of this before this earthquake. So if it really is true that the Delcy Rodriguez dictatorship is following the orders of the White House, we are about to see it, particularly because the United States has committed $150 million in aid to Venezuela. We Venezuelans know that the dictatorship cannot be the one handling those funds. We are talking about a regime that we now know stole $1 out of every $2 they made selling oil. We know that they've stolen billions from the state. It's 10 years since an oil boom gave Venezuela a massive income in oil money. And just 10 years later, rescue teams don't even have flashlights. Under this level of corruption, there is no way that this dictatorship can be trusted to help Venezuelans and to handle funds. And if the United States want international investors to go into Venezuela, if they want to recover PDVSA, if Donald Trump wants that oil money and those minerals coming out of Venezuela, they are going to have to take charge of this situation and help us.
A brief point, which is, you talked about Delcy Rodriguez, you talked about the many, many questions. With President Trump, with this scenario now, where we've talked about the US responsibility, and we will see what unfolds. But if there is a sense to President Trump's statement that this is a kind of regime change, these are different kind of people, isn't this also a moment where Delcy Rodriguez can show on an international stage that there is more that she can open up? We're hearing the UN say, please, we need unfettered access to the area. Is this a moment testing this regime?
This adds another level of difficulty to what we Venezuelans are hoping for, which is a transition to democracy. Because Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavista dictatorship, which is the same dictatorship as with Chavez, as with Maduro, there's been no real regime change. They're going to utilize this strategy to try to legitimize themselves. I thought it was interesting that Delcy Rodriguez's Twitter account, there's no information for citizens to go to shelters or to be held. Her entire Twitter account is just her thanking foreign leaders who have issued statements about Venezuela. She is going to use this to try to legitimize herself. Not only that, but to try to prolong the period before free and fair elections happen. This is another tragic part of this. We've recently had good news in Venezuela that the president of the 2015 National Assembly, the last democratically elected institution that's recognized internationally, she traveled to Venezuela to meet with Jorge Rodriguez and establish a path and a route towards free and fair elections. And the deadline for that was December, to establish how we're going to conduct free and fair elections. Obviously, these earthquakes are not going to help that timeline, and they are going to provide more time for Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavista dictatorship.
Germania, always good to hear your insight. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Gavin.
Germania Rodriguez Paleo, American Venezuelan journalist. Now